Like most record stores, we acquire a lot of pre-owned record collections. That could be 50 records, that could be 5,000. And every time we do, we get asked the same questions from you. Why was someone selling this? Where did you find it? And how much did you pay? We'll answer these questions and more on this episode, Talking About Records. My name is G.I. Sanders from NTX Vinyl, a small chain of independent record shops in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. If you're not local but you're in the U.S., you can shop online at ntxvinyl.com and would love it if you would subscribe to our channel here on YouTube or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and now on TikTok as well. Let's talk about how record stores acquire large vinyl record collections. So this is probably one of the most interesting topics, I think, for people who aren't in the business, is getting an understanding for how this stuff comes about, like how a record store, falls into a collection of 1,000 or 10,000 records or whatever it may be, where it came from, why the person was selling, how much did you pay for it. All of these are questions that I get all the time, and I suspect other record store owners probably get all the time, again, because people are just interested to learn about how this stuff works. So I thought I'd break down some of the basics. And again, this is just from my point of view, but I imagine that other record store owners could draw some parallels in regards to how they purchase collections. I'd love to hear from other store owners if they're doing things that I'm not doing. Certainly always here to learn. But first of all, let's talk about where and when, right? So where do these collections come from, and how do they kind of land in a record store's lap, right? Sometimes it really does happen like that. Other times you have to chase it down. But, a lot of times collections do walk right in the door, I should say, meaning people who are looking to sell records. The most common thing they do is they go to Google and they look for a record store near them, and then they contact them. So again, a lot of them come to us, and that's an amazing thing, and I don't take it for granted, because I used to be just a normal record collector and was chasing down collections, and it was a lot more difficult because you had to go after them. So I'm thankful now, being on the business side, that they actually do come to you. A lot of times because there's someone searching for a record store near them. They also come from referrals from friends, from family, from customers who are deciding to sell. And then last but not least, I think as far as the win, a lot of it comes down to hustle, because even though you may get contacted by someone who has a collection and they're wanting to sell, if you're not quick and you don't respond to them quickly and you're not proactive and you're not engaged in that communication with them pretty much immediately, they're just going to move on to the next record store. So you do have to be mindful of that. And a lot of times that's not easy, because you got a lot going on. You're in the middle of other projects, or maybe you have other collections you're already chasing down. So that can be one of the trickiest things in the business, is making sure that you can be first to make an offer, because it's not always on your terms, if you will. What do I usually buy as far as pre-owned? It really runs the gamut. I try to be specific and only purchase albums that I know I'm going to be able to sell, but that's usually not the case. Most of the times you always have to take the bad with the good. And when I say bad, I don't mean the albums are bad. I just mean they're simply not sellable to my customers. So for me, they're bad. I don't sell a lot of big band. I don't sell a lot of classical. I don't sell a lot of easy listening. There's just genres that in general aren't real desirable currently in today's market. That could always change, of course. But that's typically what I'm looking for, is stuff that's rock, R&B, classic country, soul, jazz, punk, metal, genres like that, again, which is the stuff that I know and love and I sell. sometimes it's all pre-owned and it's, from the, let's say, 80s or earlier, and it's a collection that someone's just had sitting in a closet for years, and they're finally looking to get rid of it. Other times it's people who are collecting up to current day and they just decided they need to get rid of it. So it can really run the gamut, and the way you treat each of those collections is very different based on what it is and based on the size, because obviously it's a lot easier to deal with the conversation around 100 records versus 1,000 or 10,000, right? So there's a lot of intricacies in those types of scenarios. Now, why would someone sell? Well, I think this is kind of easy. Like the things I hear the most, downsizing is a huge one. People just have collections, again, whether it's a couple boxes or a room full. When someone's downsizing, they're typically going to have to get rid of the records. They're moving. That's another big one. They don't want to have to pay someone to move all these things, and they haven't listened to them in years maybe. So that's another big one. Downsizing, moving, and then also, obviously, people just sometimes they need the money and they need to get out, and they know they have a collection that may be of some value. So they're looking to turn that into cash that they can use for other things like bills or something like that. So those are the most common reasons I get as far as why someone would sell. I think the bigger question I get a lot is why someone would sell to a record store. Because there's a lot of people out there who sell records. Individuals who sell records just to supplement their own collection, just to make some extra money on the side. And there's definitely a contingency of people who say, you should never sell to a record store. You're never going to get full value. And you know what? They're right. And what I tell people is, or what I ask them is, what do you value more? Do you value money? Or do you value your time? Because that's what it comes down to in regards to selling records, or selling just about anything for that matter. Because someone has to inventory the record. They have to store the records somewhere. They've got to inventory the records, and they've got to clean the records, and they've got to grade them, and they've got to sleeve them, and they've got to price them. They've got to figure out where to sell them. Then they've got to ship them, and they've got to have the correct supplies and the systems in place to be able to do that. Then they've got to deal with customer returns, customer service, and returns because something got damaged or lost in the mail. All of that takes time. And if you, as someone who's looking to sell your collection, is willing to put in that time, well, then you can absolutely make full retail value on that, selling them one at a time, selling them in bundles, whatever it may be. If you have the time and you have the energy and the knowledge to pull that off, then so be it. That's what you should do. That is the anomaly. Most people have boxes of records that have been sitting around for years, or maybe have a whole collection in storage that has been sitting around. They've been paying to store it, and they just need it gone. That's where a record store comes in. And that's most of the times where a record store acquires larger collections, because it's people who simply don't have the time or the knowledge to deal with it. So they go to a record store because it's a one-stop shop, and they don't have to deal with any of that stuff that I listed, because that's what the record store owner is going to have to deal with. The record store owner has to then store it and inventory and clean and grade and price and sleeve and sell and all of those things. That's why the record store buys it at a wholesale price, usually well below retail value, because A, they've got to make money to stay in business, but it's more about the time spent dealing with those pre-owned records. I tell people all the time, pre-owned records are amazing. The margins are much better because usually you can get them for pretty cheap when you're buying in bulk, versus new records, which cost a lot more. The margins are a lot smaller, but I can't press a button and buy more pre-owned records. It legitimately does not work like that. I have to wait until the collections either walk in the door or I'm able to chase them down. As opposed to new records where I can order. I want 10 more copies of Dark Side of the Moon. I can go to a distributor, find one that has it in stock, and I can order them. I'm going to pay a lot more per record that when I go that direction versus a pre-owned scenario. But again, I can't scale a business based on hoping that record collections keep coming around forever. And so, speaking from my own experience, that's why I sell a lot of new records in addition to the pre-owned, because you've got to have that stability in your business, and a lot of titles simply aren't available pre-owned anymore, not readily available. So that's why new vinyl reissues and things like that come into play. So let's get down to the how now. How does this come about? And this is where I think I get the most questions. First of all, I think the most important thing in regards to dealing with someone, especially in a buy-sell type of relationship, is being very upfront and transparent and polite as far as communication is concerned. If you're not going to do that, just stop now. If you're trying to make it in this business and you don't have communication skills, you're not going to make it very far. So that's first and foremost. Second of all, you've got to have the cash flow. Like, even though you may get a pre-owned collection much cheaper than if you bought, let's say, new records, because again, they cost a lot more, you still got to have a lot of cash flow for these collections. And that's, again, something that a business typically has versus an individual. If I put myself back in, a couple years ago when I was just a collector before I got into the business side of things, if I would have dropped, hundreds or certainly thousands of dollars on a collection, that would have been really dicey in my household, right? But as a business owner, I do that all day long. Like, it happens literally every day, whether I'm buying new or pre-owned. I spend a lot of money on inventory, right? And so it's just a different mindset when you're a business owner as far as how much you're committing to, because you're looking at it as inventory that you're going to need to grow your business and hopefully sustain long term, right? So that's a big part of it. Understanding how to negotiate. This is getting down into the kind of nuts and bolts of it. This is really key, and this is one of the things a lot of people tell me they could never do. Like, you walk into these scenarios, like, how do you figure out a price, right? How do you figure out what to offer someone for a collection of 1,000 or 5,000 records or whatever? I do it a couple different ways. One, I tell people, I'm very transparent, and I tell them exactly what I just said in regards to that whole list of things that need to happen. And I do give them that same line almost every time. I say, what do you value more, your money or your time? And I talk them through all the steps that have to happen in order for these records to be sold one at a time. And most of the time people understand that because they know they're dealing with someone who runs a business, and they understand that point of view on some level. So what I'll do is I'll walk into a scenario where someone is looking to sell a collection, and I'll say, hey, all I need is, 30 minutes. Doesn't matter. 30 minutes to an hour is tops, even for the largest collections, because no one wants to block out a whole day. And I don't want to go to someone's house that I've never met and spend a whole day looking through thousands of records, although that could be fun. And in most scenarios, the person doesn't want me in their home doing that either. So, give me 30 minutes, give me an hour if it's a larger collection. That will give me the time I need to look through, maybe not all of it, but the vast majority of it, to get an idea of what's there. Oftentimes what I'll do as well is I will, as I'm going through, if it's not in any order, sometimes things are in alphabetical order, so you don't want to pull them all out of order and then end up not making a deal, and then they're left with a big mess. So I don't like to do that. But if they're not in any order, I will go in and I'll start immediately as I'm sorting through. I'll ask them beforehand, you mind if I start sorting these, just so I can get a grasp for what's there? And I'll sort things very quickly based on albums that I know are sought after versus more common albums. So I'll just start pulling out all the albums that are worth, usually $15 and $20 and up albums at retail, right? I'll start pulling those out, because as I get through the collection, again, whether it's hundreds or thousands, that will very quickly start to give me a visual idea of what I'm dealing with. Because if I'm dealing with boxes and boxes that are building up of albums that sell for $15, $20, I know in my mind that I'm going to be able to offer a good amount for this, because I know I can sell all those for retail. I'm assuming, and I'm making sure condition is good. I'm spot checking condition on the way. As a generalization, when you look through someone's collection, if the large majority of it is in pretty good condition, it's well cared for, the jackets and the vinyl, well, you just have to take an educated guess and think that, okay, the bulk of the collection is be like that. There's always going to be outliers. You're always going to run across an album, you're going to pull it out and go, oh man, it's got a big old scratch on it. But there's no way you can check each one. That would take you beyond even a day, right? And no one has that amount of time. So you've got to spot check, and you've got to have the education to kind of go through and go, okay, are these reissues? Are these originals? What does the condition look like? And you've got to do all of this in real time, in 30, 45, 60 minutes, right? And again, if it's just 100 records, that's easy. If it's 1,000 or 5,000 records, you got to be quick, and you got to be assertive and make sure to get through things very quickly, because at the end of that time, whenever you're kind of done, I'm thinking, okay, how am I going to formulate my offer here? How am I going to come up with a price that I think is reasonable to them so they're happy, but then also is reasonable to me so that I know I can make money after I spend a whole lot of time dealing with this type of collection, right? So I think that's very key. And I think the education part is critical too. And what I mean by that is both ways. And I mentioned this, I'm as transparent as I can be in these situations. And as I'm looking through these albums, I'm usually talking to the people at the same time. And I'm pulling out albums and I'm saying, hey, this is a great record. This retails for like $20. I'm putting them into those buckets. That's giving that person the confidence that, I'm not ripping them off, because I'm going to make them a fair offer. And B, I'm not trying to slip anything under the radar. I legitimately am going out and I'll go through a whole box of records and be like, hey, all of these right here, these are dollar records at best. And they'll be like, really? Oh man, I love that artist. I'm saying, hey, there's nothing wrong with the music. It's just not desirable. It's not collectible, and it doesn't sell well. I can tell you. You can walk into my stores right now and you can buy these albums for $1 or $2 or $3, which means if I'm going to purchase these from you, I'm going to have to get them for pennies, right? Those ones specifically, versus this batch over here, which I've separated out, which again, sell for, $15, $20 and up or something like that. Then I can make them an offer based on, hey, you have, this many hundreds of records that are worth this. You have this many hundreds that are kind of dollar bin. You've got kind of miscellaneous over here that maybe might be a lot of donate records. Believe me, I donate a lot of records because you get a lot of stuff in. Like I said, you take the bad with the good. So with almost every collection, there ends up being, some percentage of it. Let's say 15 to 25% on the average that is simply not sellable because of condition or because of the genre and the era it comes from. So there's always a portion that is like a loss leader, and that's written off obviously as a business expense. So that's kind of like, again, you go into a scenario, you got to be quick. In my opinion, you be transparent, you be honest, and you try and get to that middle ground. It works a lot of different ways. Sometimes I will ask, or most times I will ask people, I'll say, do you have a number in mind? Like, you've got a collection of, let's say, 1,000 records. You've held on to it for 40 years. There's some sort of sentimental value there for most people. And that's what makes it difficult for them to part with. And a lot of times you say, all right, well, what are you looking to get for this? And it can go a lot of different ways. Most of the times people don't have any clue. Most of the time people are like, I have no idea. You're the expert. What do you pay for these types of things? I hear that pretty frequently. The other thing I hear is, well, I went on eBay and I looked up the Beatles' White Album and I saw it selling for $4,000. Or I went on eBay and looked up Elvis Presley records, and man, I saw some ones that were crazy high, and I know I've got those same ones. And those conversations are tough to navigate, because the reality is what people ask for records, what people put up as an asking price, is not the market value of what people actually pay. Sometimes it is, but in most cases, Beatles and the Elvis and these types of artists, like, they were pressed in the multi-millions, and they still are, so they're very, very common. But to those people, there's a nostalgia attached, and I get it. Believe me, they've had those records for years and years. So you've got to kind of navigate that nostalgia and navigate their attachment to these records. Some people aren't attached at all. Some people are really, really attached. So that's something, again, as someone who's about to negotiate, I have to keep that in mind. If I see that they're really attached to these, if I come in with a lowball offer, they're probably just going to say no thanks and kick me out. Like, regardless of how polite I am, they're just probably looking for way too much money for their collection. And if they want to get that much money, well, they can put the time in, right? That's all I tell people all the time. If you want to get, $30, $40 an album for all of these collectible ones, go for it. You use inventory and clean it and grade it and sleeve it and price it and sell it and ship it and deal with returns. You do all that, you can get that $40 an album or whatever it may be, right? Me, as a record store owner, I'm the one who's going to consume all of that responsibility when I make you an offer. So again, lots of times I will come in, I will section it off, and I will tell people, hey, these sell for on an average of 15 or 20 bucks. So I will pay you $5 each, because by the time I go through and actually inspect them all and figure out which pressing it is, what the condition is, then I've got to figure out where I'm going to sell it, and I've got to sleeve it and price it. Add all that in, and that's a decent margin for me. I'm not making a killing at that point if I'm selling, some records, again, I guesstimated that these are $15 to $20. Some of them may only selling up for $5 or $10 because they're lower on the condition side, or the pressing was not as desirable as maybe some of the ones I'm used to seeing. And then it goes the other direction too, where I may find one in that stack that sells for $100. I had no idea. That's part of the job of going through this inventory. If it's 50 or 100 records, it's not that hard. You can get through that. But I'm really talking about larger collections of thousands of records where there's a significant time investment that it's going to take for someone, anybody, whether it's the owner of them or the person that they sell them to. It's going to have to take their time and go through it. And if they're not educated about what they have, they're probably better off just selling it in bulk and being done with it if they need to get rid of it, again, unless they want to educate themselves and actually get into the business even for a short term and sell on their own to really maximize their profits, right? So those are some of the things that I always keep in mind as I'm going into a situation where I'm going to negotiate. It really goes a number of different ways. Like I mentioned, some people are really receptive. Some people are they're just way too attached to it. And believe me, I get it. If I ever had to sell my collection, I would just be completely torn up over it. And I've been in those scenarios, and they're tough. I've been in the worst scenario I ever had. I think I've probably told this story before, but I showed up at an older couple's house, and I had been dealing with the wife, and she said, my husband has thousands of records he needs to sell. And she showed me a picture, and it was a whole storage unit essentially full of records. And I walked into the place. It was a little bit of a drive out to their house, and met her. She was super nice, and she introduced me to her husband, and turns out his collection. So we went out to where the records were in the kind of the building they had them in. And I asked him, I said, so what, the first question I ask everybody, so why now? Why you ended up selling these? And his answer just completely broke me, because he said, oh, I don't even know I was selling these until my wife told me you were coming. And I was like, oh my God, this guy's collected these for like 50 years. He had amazing stuff. And I dropped in on him. She gave him no forewarning. She didn't tell me that, of course. So I'm sitting here with this guy, and he just like, oh my God, I'm selling my records today. I didn't have any idea. But the silver lining was that he followed that comment up with, but I'm getting old and my health's not good, and I'm afraid something's going to happen to me, and then she's just going to have to donate them all because she's not going to know what to do with them. So I felt a little better then, because at least he understood that, yeah, and this was a big collection. There was probably 5,000 records. And at that point, I was just like, okay, maybe I've got a chance here. And I didn't buy the whole collection, but he did go through and pick out ones that he was really attached to sentimentally. And I told him, I said, go through all these boxes as I'm picking them out. Just flip through them quickly. If you see any that you just can't bear to get rid of, just pull them out, man. And he did. And he pulled out, probably a whole box. And I ended up going home with 10 or 12 boxes or something. But he pulled out a bunch of really good stuff. Some of it was rare and collectible that I was like, oh, no, don't pull that one out. Others were completely common stuff I didn't care about. It was just stuff that he was attached to sentimentally. So yeah, that was one of the tougher ones. I've got a lot of stories like that. But yeah, so as far as how a record store acquires collections, that's kind of how I look at it. That's the process I kind of think through each time when I get contacted by somebody, or if I end up finding out about a collection and I have to hustle and go chase it down myself. That still does happen quite often. So a lot of different scenarios and kind of variables that go into something like this. But hopefully that was entertaining at the very least, maybe a little educational. If you have any questions, I would love to hear in the comments. So let me know if this was helpful in any way to answer some of those questions. Because again, I get asked about this stuff all the time. Every time I acquire a collection and show photos of it, hey, I got another new big collection in. I'm going to be pricing it for my local shop soon. Inevitably, I start getting questions like where did it come from and why did they sell and how much did it cost and all those things. And so that's why I want to shoot this video, to answer a lot of the most commonly asked questions I get. So really appreciate the time. As always, this has been another episode of Talking About Records. We will pop up some additional videos now. Stick around on the channel, and we will see you again next time.